So welcome everyone to the Victorian Stakeholder Forum for the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. In starting the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I'm Claire Petrie, the chair of the panel. I was the former Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales, and I'm currently chair of the New Energy Tech Consumer Code Council. We have Cassandra Goldie, who is CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards, who's CEO of the Energy Users Association of Australia. This year, the panel has received disclosures from 16 signatories to the Energy Charter, and all those disclosures are available on the IAP website. But the purpose of today's forum is to hear from you as consumers and consumer representatives, to hear to what extent your experience matches the disclosures of the signatories during 2021. If we have any people from the energy companies at this forum, they won't be speaking. They just want to hear directly from their stakeholders. So I've asked them to be on mute or off camera. In fact, this year, the CEOs asked if the stakeholder forums could be held first so that they could respond to what you have to say in these meetings with the panel. This is now the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's work in reviewing the disclosures of the companies that signed up to the Energy Charter. Even though it's still a work in progress and things change year by year, we hope that you share our view that the process has developed positively, shorter and more focused disclosures from the signatories and a shorter and more focused report from the panel. As last year and certainly the year before, we asked the signatories to provide a realistic and transparent response in their disclosures. We didn't want to see a public relations document or hear about actions that signatories have to take, in any case, by law or regulation. In particular, we asked them to tell us what it really means to put the customer first in terms of the culture of their company, the involvement of their board and or senior management in the charter process, and their response to the recommendation in the panel's 2020 report. As we noted last year, it's disappointing that AGL and Origin Energy have withdrawn as charter signatories, and we commend Energy Australia as one of the big three for their continuing commitment as a charter signatory. In contrast to Energy Australia, there are some large government-owned energy companies that have never been involved with the Charter, a situation of poor sector leadership that we again note with regret. It's sad that in 2021, we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19, with everyone in Australia having been impacted, individuals, families, businesses, some more than others. Again, sadly, there have been natural disasters in some areas with serious impacts, including on the delivery of energy services. As a community advocate once reminded me, energy supply is a secondary problem if you can't afford a roof over your head. And we know that housing stress for many people around the country is a very real issue, as well as general financial stress. So to be honest, the themes of this year's report are likely to be similar to those of last year: affordability of essential energy services, transmission to net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner, with the consequent key issue that no customer should be left behind in this transition. So I'll ask Cassandra Goldie to talk briefly about the affordability issue, and then Andrew Richards to talk about the energy sustainability and transition issue. So Cassandra.
Thanks, Claire. And can I just acknowledge I'm on Gadigal land and pay respects to elders past and present. And also just wanted to say it's great to see so many of you joining us today. For those who are consumer advocates, I particularly want to acknowledge, I know it's been a really big and hard year for many, many people, and the extraordinary work that you have all been doing and being required to be in many places. And so we are very grateful for your participation today on behalf of the panel, and I know the signatories will have the same view. You may remember 12 months ago, certainly the panel was very worried about what we might see in terms of a debt accumulation, effectively a debt tsunami, the unpredictability of what would happen in terms of job losses, changes to people's income levels, and obviously the multiple impacts of the COVID pandemic. And at this point, we understand that we've now got a significant increase in the level of indebtedness, sort of estimates of about 40% increase in energy debts. And of course, we've had a very patchy picture in terms of job losses and income changes for people. And of course, we've now had these really big increases in housing costs and rental prices, particularly in some parts of the country. And so really for us, we're trying to understand now from you, from the signatories, what has worked in terms of protecting people from being disconnected and from managing the level of sort of energy bills, but also what's needed next in light of where we're at now, so that we can both recognise and value where signatories have changed things for the better and what you think is important for us to call to be embedded ongoing, and where you would like to see even stronger action from the signatories. Can I note, we acknowledge that there is not only energy companies and retailers that have a role to play in this area, and there is government policy as well that affects it. So any views you may have on the roles and responsibilities of different, players in terms of delivering affordability and ensuring that we don't have people in, serious economic distress, which plays out in their energy bills. I know we have that as we speak. So very keen to hear your views and what's needed next. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Cass. Andrew?
Thanks, Claire, and once again, thanks everyone for turning up. I'm on Wurundjeri land here in Victoria. So Cass has just talked about, I guess, the transition out of COVID, and we don't want to leave customers behind in that transition, but there's also the transition to net zero by 2050 or sooner. That transition will involve a lot of technology deployment and a lot of people making investments in technology. It has the potential, though, because of that, to potentially entrench vulnerability and hardship as we transition, because there will be people who can't afford the technology or can't engage with it. So we want to make sure that through this process of this great transition to net zero, that no customer is left behind. We don't entrench vulnerability, but we lift people up out of it. And that goes from not only people paying the energy bills, but also people in communities, a lot of regional communities, who the energy transition will be in their backyard or running past their fence. And we need to make sure that those communities as well, and those stakeholders, are equally well looked after in this transition and benefit from the transition, and aren't sort of collateral damage, if you like, through this process. Wanting to make sure we can find a way forward in that great transition. Sometimes it's hard to think about those longer term things when you're faced with such immediate problems around COVID and debt that we keep hearing about, and Cass has already identified. So really keen to hear your thoughts today, the good, the bad and the ugly. So it's not just about beating up the energy companies. If they're doing some good things that can be replicated elsewhere, then please let us know what those things are as well. And we want to understand what the solutions might look like from your perspective as consumer advocates as well, because we want this to be a positive and proactive approach. So Claire, over to you and carry on.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, well, now it's over to you to tell us about your experiences during 2021 and the feedback that we can pass on to the CEOs of signatory organisations. We, as you probably know, we interview each of them, and those interviews will be up on the IAP website. But it's really important for your feedback to contribute to the critique of our the panel's critique of the disclosures for this year. What I would ask is, because there are quite a few of you, if you can either use the raise your hand action on the on Zoom, or put a message in the chat room, or just interrupt. We don't mind. It's fairly informal. And then we can go through, hear from each of you, and then certainly open it up for general discussion. So I see, Ash, you have your hand up first, so you might like to lead off. Thank you. And if I could ask everyone to, in speaking, if you could just introduce yourself and say who you're from, or who you're representing, or where you're from.
Thank you, Claire. Ash Sardini from the National Farmers Federation. I just want to echo some of the points that Andrew raised right at the end of his sort of introduction. And so from an agricultural perspective, we're not just impacted as consumers, we're impacted as landowners as well. And I think the engagement and the involvement of landowners and regional rural communities, including local governments, First Nations people, farmers, and others, hasn't been up to scratch in terms of this transition we're talking about. And when we talk about this transition we to net zero, it requires a lot of transmission lines and reses, and on the most, in fact, if not all, are in regional rural communities. Now, this is not just an energy industry problem, it's a government problem as well. So, for example, the ISP has a landowner panel and a consumer panel, doesn't have a landowner or local community panel. So we're housing these massive bits of infrastructure in regional and rural areas with very little engagement. And the first that a farmer hears of it is whether it should be on the front fence or on the back fence, and that's simply not good enough. And then there's models of how these benefits are shared as well. So let's be honest, we're not building large-scale renewables and transmission lines to ship energy from Bunbury to Busselton. We are, we're shipping it from, the back of Burke to Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra. So the benefit for the urban areas are there. We need to create those benefits for our regional and rural areas. So that's the issue. And I think it's a missing gap in the energy industry's approach around getting those landowners on side and getting some of their interests and some of their concerns addressed. Now, from an advocate's perspective, the energy industry creates a significant amount of work, and it's a work that we simply can't do. And in being honest with you, there's two approaches we can do. We can be uninformed and just throw rocks, which is the easier one because the energy industry doesn't have a huge amount of friends around the place, or we can try to get involved and be a bit more rational, but we just don't have the resources. But every time there's an issue with a transmission line, or there's a rule change, or there's this or that, we're either expected to be at the table or just accept suboptimal outcomes. And frankly, we're at the point where we're not going to accept suboptimal outcomes. We'll just throw rocks, and that's an easier way to be for us, unless there's a way to resource involvement there, and particularly from that landowner perspective. So the consumer perspective is important, but the landowner perspective is the bit that is creating sort of enemies amongst friends. It's creating a neighbour against neighbour issues. It's creating all sorts of conflict. And frankly, the way regional and rural people see the energy industry is the one that requires the social license. So you need to demonstrate that social license for us to then accept it. I'll leave it there because I know we have a lot of other people to talk to about other issues as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, sorry, before we do leave you, Ash, in terms of the support for advocates, where would you like to see that come from? Whose responsibility is that in the main?
Luckily, we have something prepared in our pre-budget submission. But look, from an energy industry perspective, we expect what we would like is at least 2 forums a year where you look back 6 months, you look forward 6 months to say, as opposed to us going, okay, there's 100 odd rule changes, there's 20 odd reform processes and papers pumped out with about 3,000 or 4,000 pages worth of information. You to come to us collectively and say, this is what we think from a regional and rural perspective are the key issues, the key opportunities, key concerns going forward. And here's some of the big decisions we've made in the last three months or so. So you as advocates can sort of go and engage with. So I think that forum idea is one way. And then the other plug I'd give to is the Energy Industry Task Force, which on the most the Irrigators Council runs. We are a part of it, but we don't do any of the work. They need resourcing to do the work, or essentially, as I say, will just become reactionary, because they're 1.5 people, the Irrigators Council. So that's where we sit. The other thing, we're obviously asking governments to sort of step up as well. So, but that's the industry ask from our perspective.
Thank you. Lisa, I notice you're there from the representing farmers as well. So while we're on this theme, did you want to say anything?
I'm just agreeing with everything that Ash said. It's Lisa from the Victorian Farmers Federation. So we're one of the members of the National Farmers Federation. Obviously, we've had some interesting, maybe potentially some of our members throwing rocks at the moment with certain transmission projects that haven't really understood that farming isn't just vacant land, and there is going to be impacts if you tell a potato grower, for example, that you're not allowed to irrigate your crop anymore because there's going to be a power line over the top of you. So we've always had some entry to farm policies that probably were triggered with mining, but we've now actually reviewed a lot of that and thought about, it probably doesn't matter whether it's a power company, a water company, a mining company. If someone's going onto your farm, what are the things they need to consider to actually make sure that the community benefit isn't at your private sort of business cost? So I've popped a note in there that we've got about a 2-page policy statement that breaks down into stages about some of the things that need to be considered when you're proposing to put something on, farming land. It's a little bit different from a lot of other categories, but it's quite often people don't have a great understanding of farming and the intricacies between commodities. They sort of just see it as vacant land because there's not necessarily structures, but it's not. So I'll just plug our position statement, and we've also got a renewable energy policy about how you can sort of facilitate that without impacting on agriculture, and the type of strategic work that you need to do to make sure you're planning it, not just looking at each application in isolation, but how you actually get energy to consumers.
Thank you. Look, Ash, could I just come back to you for a minute, because I think this is a question that impacts on all consumer advocates in the energy field, that we have an energy industry that is huge and very powerful and very well resourced, and then we have a advocacy movement which is very small and very poorly resourced, and yet there are huge demands on that area in terms of sitting on customer councils, contributing to regulatory changes, rule changes and all the rest of it. So and it takes time to develop that sort of knowledge and expertise. It's quite a complicated area. So where should that support be really coming from? Is it a shared responsibility? How do we resource consumer advocates so that they can be sustainable in this really complex area?
Yeah, it's a great question, and if I had the answers,
Yeah,
probably would be doing something different right now. No, one of the answers, and I can only talk from an agricultural perspective, and noting that we play 2 roles, as I said, as a consumer, as a landowner. One of it is triaging the sheer amount of engagement points. So, I did a paper a while back for the Energy Consumers Australia, where to be actively involved for the agricultural sector in the energy debate, there would be 50 odd engagements that someone would have to sort of embrace. And that's not all of it. That's about 25% of all the rule changes, all the AEMO, AEMC, AER, ACCC. So there's 50 odd. That's one engagement a week. So day of prep time, a day of showing up, a day of writing a submission. That's nearly more than a half an FTE. So one is a triaging of the issues. And so what we're asking from the government, so I told you about the what we're asking from industry, is around a regional and rural impact statement, particularly from a landowner perspective. So at least when there's a 1,000-page document, you can flick to the back and go to the last 3 pages, say, oh, okay, those I should worry about pages 110 to 125. I don't have to read the 3,000 pages to get up to speed. The next one is around the ISP having a landowner and local community panel, not just a consumer panel and a industry panel. The final one was the one that I'm sort of I threw to the industry around having those 2 forums resourced and funded, put together, where you guys triage what you think is important for regional rural stakeholders from a landowner and consumer perspective, but obviously that can be sort of extended out to other forums for other consumers, depending on what their specific needs are, because what might impact a social services organisation is very different from what impacts a farming organisation. But I think it's the energy industry's responsibility to put those things together, because we've tried to triage the hundreds of engagements, and it's just you get flooded, and in the end, energy is a 3rd or 4th order issue for us, and so again, it's easier for us to throw rocks, and that's the truth of it. The easiest way to is just make you guys look like the criminals, the energy industry, but that's not a good way to engage, because obviously we all need energy. We need a viable energy industry, so we don't want to be the reactionary. But from our perspective, there's a principal agent issue here as well. With the agents of our members would love us to throw rocks as well. So realistically, we would be solving the dilemma of our principal agents dichotomy there. But I don't think it's a very effective or very productive way to be. But that's where we go with the number, and it's not your fault as an industry. The regulations as well creates a lot of the problems as well. But unpicking that is going to be very hard to do as well.
Thanks, Ash. Anna Crabb.
Thanks, Claire. On a very different topic, just wanted to talk about and share our experiences delivering the Victorian Energy Assistance Program, which is a Victorian government funded program that was brought in as part of the COVID relief package. And I see that Matt Cairns from Uniting is on the line as well. And so this has been delivered in collaboration with both Uniting, hey Matt, and Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. I'm sure Matt will have a lot to share as well, but a couple of particular points I just wanted to pick up that are likely well known, but just to reiterate those. What we're finding through that energy assistance program is that just the real issue of digital disadvantage and people simply not having access to the internet and being unaware of energy concessions and utilities concessions is a real issue that has a big contribution to financial hardship for people. So energy retailers, distributors thinking about providing information in the post or through other channels is really important. Other one is around just a very simple one in terms of using a phone-based service, issues like stroke, literacy not being taken into account in the setup of the phone-based complaints inquiry system that customers have to access and they're not able to navigate. We find through this program, through this service, our energy advisors are able to assist customers to save in the realms of $400 up to $2,500 through just one phone call. This is a pretty clear indication that the right information isn't getting through to customers and they're not getting what they're entitled to. So just encourage energy retailers to reflect and think about making sure that their information, their advice is accessible to all customers and that they get the information that they deserve to make sure that they're on the right plans and packages.
Thank you, Anna. Matt, did you want to comment, take that further?
Yeah, I mean, Anna's touched on pretty much all the things that I would have talked about for the energy assistance program. I mean, the great thing about that program is that because it was open to any and all retailer customers of any retailer, it was good to see the different experiences we had with different retailers as well. I know that there's not a huge amount of the retailers on the energy charter at the moment as signatories, but yeah, the ones that are, we had relatively easy experiences with them. So Energy Australia, like their customers it was a lot easier to navigate their hardship programs than it was to some of the smaller retailers. So that consistency of experience for a customer across the board is quite different. So it's really there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that that's a bit more of an easier opportunity for people, irrespective of what retailer they're with. It should be fairly standard, that customer experience. But I wanted to, there's obviously been a few rocks, I guess, as Ash like to mention earlier on, but I just wanted to mention a couple of good programs that have come out of the Energy Charter Group. So we've done some work with Gemini over the last couple of years, but it's especially during COVID, where it was pretty evident that there was a lot of community members who were missing out on support. So apologies for kids running through the background there, if anyone heard that. The joys of a digital world. Not having access to the right information or knowing where to go to for support, and with COVID and increasing debt levels, people really disconnected from engaging with their retailers. So the opportunities to sort of support those people, it's a lot more difficult for the retailers to do, because people just weren't answering calls or letters or anything. But those people were generally popping up at community organisations for support, whether it's emergency relief or financial counselling, family supports, whatever it might be. And that's where we targeted our approach, is to highlight those areas, those programs that were having a greater need come through, and utilising our connections there to help promote our program and let people know that the support's there and that they can come through to us for that support. So similar to the energy assistance program with Anna's team and BSL, but it was targeted specifically for Gemini's catchment and in Victoria, and also in their gas distribution network, gas network in New South Wales. And it was great just having that opportunity to quickly capture people as they came through for a support, and then at a certain community organisation, but then being offered further supports for something that they might not have actually gone there for initially. So if they've just come for a food relief hamper, and then the conversation they have with their support worker there, and the support worker finds out that they've got large debts on their energy bills and they're worried about them, and then having that opportunity to have a conversation with someone over the phone to get the relevant supports that they might need. So I guess the flip side of that is that the retailers probably could do a little bit better to make sure that they get those supports anyway. But yeah, I think through COVID we saw that there was a lot of stress and anxiety in the community. So engagement was a little bit more difficult. So yeah, just want to say thanks to Gemini for that support, and that's continued as well for this year, which is great. And there's also a bunch of other energy businesses through the Energy Charter that have signed up to the same work with us through New South Wales, Queensland, and Gemini and Victoria again. So yeah, I'd name them all, but I'm sure I'll forget one of them, so then I'll get in trouble. So, but I'll have a crack anyway. So the Power Shop's one of the interesting ones, because they're new for us. We've never really worked with them before, but the really exciting ones are we've got CS Energy, which is a generator up in Queensland. We've also got a transmission network, Powerlink, which have never worked in this space before. So it's really exciting to get new businesses thinking in a different way about how they can support their local communities where they work. We've got Ergon Energy Australia, Energy Queensland up in Queensland, but Essential Energy in New South Wales, and Endeavour Energy in New South Wales as well. And also APA Group, which is a gas pipeline company, which is completely the opposite sort of business we would normally work with. So it's as in, because we'd never really connected with them before, but it's amazing to see the generosity and the thinking outside the square of what businesses can do in this space to support local communities who are really struggling. So, and a lot of great work was done with Sabine on that. So want to definitely make sure she gets a shout out too. So yeah, so there's some positive stuff anyway, just for everyone.
Matt, could you talk to that question? Retailers will often say, look, we can help, but if a customer won't engage, what can we do? And it often comes down to that question of engagement. So what can be done? What should be done? How can we get over that fact? And as you would know, there'd be many reasons for lack of engagement. It might be language. It might be, I'm overwhelmed by other problems. It might be health, a whole range of things. So how can we progress that?
That's a really good question, Claire. Probably similar to the good question you asked Ash, but I think it comes down to building that a really close relationship and a good relationship with your customer base. So the more that the customers can see that you're there to support them, the more likely they will engage. As soon as there's a disconnect there with any conversations they have where they feel like they haven't been respected or their issue hasn't been heard, then automatically people will just, they won't want to talk to that person again. So, and that person is reflective of the business to them. So they might have a better experience with somebody else, but for them, that's the business. So that the training of staff on the front line in like respectful communication and making sure that they understand all of the supports that are available for someone. So they offer all of those supports so that the customer feels supported, will really go a long way to making sure that engagement level stays there. So as soon as they don't feel supported or they feel disrespected, then they're gone. So, and it's really difficult. But I think on the flip side of that is that if there will always be some customers that are really difficult to connect with. But I think what is important as well is making sure that your processes for communication with their support workers, whether it's a financial counsellor or one of our team or one of Anna's team, someone who's actually there to navigate that engagement for that person who's got a range of issues that you mentioned, Claire, making that process simple and painless is going to also help highlight to that customer that, okay, they actually still are there to help. But if you make that difficult for that support person, then they hear that conversation and that just makes them think, well, you're not there for me. So there's a really big bit of work to make sure that those frontline staff are really well supported with training and the skills needed to help navigate that. And I think also you want to make sure that it's a bit of a longer term process, but you want to make sure that your support staff in the retail of the energy businesses are also reflective of the communities that they support as well. So you want to make sure that they're diverse, that they come from really different backgrounds, like economically and culturally and religiously, and a whole bunch of different parameters, so that people feel that it just builds that better culture within that organization as well. So you don't want to get them all from the exact same recruitment place and all looking and acting the same. So because you're not going to have that diversity that you really want.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I must say, one of the continuing frustrations for the panel, and I know the community sector, is that there are customers who are entitled to concessions and other things that just time after time aren't getting them. And there has to be a way of resolving that. And it's just an ongoing frustration that people are missing out on things that they're entitled to and adding to their debt burden.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even simple thing is like, someone who's on a concession card, they should be on the cheapest deal for that energy retailer. They shouldn't be on the most expensive one, because automatically they're on a very limited income. So, make sure that the amount they pay per unit of energy is the cheapest it is with your company, is one of the simplest things you can do.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Anna. Okay, who else would like to make a contribution? Who have we got? I know.
Let's kind of circle back to a comment that Anna made around digital disadvantage. I think it's a great way of putting it, Anna. You read in the disclosures, it's a double-edged sword. So lots of people are highly digitized, and it's a great way for them to engage and to get information about new products and all those sorts of things. And for the company, that's an efficient way to do it, so they can reduce costs and hopefully those costs get passed through. But that leaves a lot of people behind as well who aren't digitized. So what's the solution there? I mean, because the infrastructure required to do paper bills and to have people in the field to deal with those people has to remain. So therefore some of the cost benefits get lost. So there's a bit of a conflict there for companies trying to manage this. And I guess it's a bit of a forerunner to what I mentioned before around the transition to net zero, that there'll be lots of people who will grab new technology and deploy it, but there'll be lots of people, and there'll be another group of people who don't or who can't. So I think what we're seeing now with this digital disadvantage could be a future disadvantage around clean technology too, perhaps. Do you see potentially that occurring? Or?
Yeah, I was nodding a lot when you initially said that, actually, because that is the real risk, the residualization of customers within the current way of operating within the energy market and the energy system, with others steaming off ahead. So I think the Energy Assistance Program is working really well. It's simple. It's a phone-based service. Advice of like making people aware of that is through channels like Uniting's existing programs. So their social workers and financial counsellors are passing on that information. I think it's very much just a multi-channel strategy needed for the energy companies to have to be meeting the needs of their different customer bases, fully acknowledge the need for efficiencies for those that are capable and wanting to have a fully digital experience. But it should not be at the expense of excluding what is quite a significant pool of customers who are not able to engage with digital technologies that we often forget. It's easy to forget about sometimes. If you're fully digital and wanting to access services that way, there is a really significant portion of the population that is still only able to and wanting to engage through phone and face-to-face and post.
I'm very much thinking about my 80-year-old mum here who, and lots of people nodding, lots of people got 80-year-old mums and dads they've got an iPad and they use it to look at photos of their grandkids, but to pay bills and those sorts of things, they need to have the paper.
And if we stay with this theme, great to see you both. And Matt, it's really great to hear some of that detail around how it's actually working in that third-party trusted relationship. We've been talking a lot about that in a whole range of contexts, including vaccinations, actually, I am interested in your views about whether we need to, of course, access to digital services is not only in this area of essential service, right? So, for any kind of support now, the push to get people to use digital platforms is overwhelming, and no more so than Services Australia, right? Do you have a view about what we're battling a little bit, I think, with this notion that it is sort of just a question of time, and that yes, people are older, Andrew, they're it's sort of generational. I'm interested in your views about whether actually we need to put a stake in the ground to say, no, there will always be a place for the analogue off-system supports and we need to build that in, or whether you have a view that this is a sort of a transitional phase and we've got to keep a residual service in place as long as needed, but we're moving to digital only. Matt, your comments there?
Yeah, really good question, Cassandra. I think you definitely need to have some analog approaches as well, because even people might have the skill set to navigate digitally, but they don't have the funds to actually have that access. So affording internet or a mobile phone with smart features and stuff is just beyond the realms of their possibilities. So I think that we just need to be, like Anna mentioned, just have to have a bit more of a scattergun approach to try and capture everybody. But I think that percentage of people who digital information will be great, will increase in time. That'll be a natural sort of progression. But I think there's always going to be a percentage of people who just cannot afford it, because they can't even afford their energy bills. There's a percentage consumers that will never afford their energy bills. Doesn't matter how cheap the energy becomes. So unless we go back to what Andrew was mentioning about technologies and stuff, is that we target our new solar battery sort of programs to those people who are going to get the most financial benefit out of it than what it is currently targeted at with middle income and higher. So, if it's for people who have that, inaffordability or unaffordability issue with their energy, and to just make sure that they're the ones who are supported with that transition to clean technology. So I think that would help. Yeah, but the digital one, I think there's always going to be an analog need. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
And just on that, I think Lisa's made the good point in the chat room that digital disadvantage can be a factor of affordability, but it also can be that you just live remotely and your coverage is rat shit. And
it probably doesn't have to be that remote, Claire.
Yeah, well, that's true. Absolutely. So there are lots of reasons that it can be a disadvantage.
It's almost a, as part of a sort of a future-proofing risk management, you've got to have a backup plan, because systems fail for a whole range of reasons.
And I think the point was well made during COVID, where families had 2 or 3 children at home trying to do remote learning, and one parent was trying to work remotely. You needed 3 devices. How many families have that? Many families just don't have that access if they have one device and then all trying to get onto the system at the same time. I mean, it really highlighted that disadvantage, I think, for many families in a whole range of areas. Sudipta, you had your hand up. Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, my video is off due to the poor internet. As we're talking about disadvantage here. Hi, everyone. I'm from CSK, and it's a market research and consulting firm, and we do an energy benchmarking program with a lot of distributors who are signatories to Energy Charter. And I wanted to share something around what Andrew and Anna have been talking about, digital disadvantaged customers. So what I feel the next step is to understand your customer base properly. And that's what we are trying to do through our energy benchmarking program. Not only asking them the feedback on how we are doing, but trying to ask few demographic questions, few preference of the channels, etc., to better understand what are your customers' preference so that you understand your customer base. So if you're spending millions and billions of dollars on digital initiatives and your customer base is 80% an older customer base who would not like to even take up that digital initiative, you will fail miserably. So it's more about understanding your customer base, your customer segments, to be very precise. So do a segmentation, an overall segmentation first to understand the mix of your customer, and then put initiatives based on their preferences, what they want from you. So just wanted to make that point here.
Thank you very much. Dale Storer, you had some interesting comments in the chat room. Would you like to share them with the group? Where are you? Or have you gone? I think you might have gone.
Claire, can I just pick up a bit of a theme there from Sudipta? I think energy companies are really good at segmenting their customer base by energy consumption and energy preferences, but I think we're starting to hear a theme too that you need to also segment your customer base by the way they receive information and their ability to receive that information. I'm not I could be wrong, but I'm not sure not enough of that occurs. It's very much energy focused, not communication focused. And so maybe there's some additional segmentation that needs to be undertaken here. So talk to the Matts and the Annas and the Sudiptas of the world and understand around how information is received, and also the energy literacy, which then goes to the whole energy literacy issue. So maybe there's something in that.
And sorry, Andrew, just to add to that, it's also not just the energy literacy, but the literacy level of the people that you're sending your information to. So, like, you've got to really make sure it's simple and easily understood, so that a bigger percentage of the community can read it and actually understand it.
We had our New South Wales forum just before this, and there's some really good work being done in in some non-English speaking communities to improve energy literacy. Those sorts of things are really good programs, which go to part of that as well. You know, being a multicultural community, we need to be not just say it, but actually understand where those segments are and how best to communicate with them.
That's right. Yeah, and even use just visual tools instead of words as well.
Yeah.
Matt, just with the depth of the experience you've had and across a number of different signatory companies, on that front, where have you seen the best of that in terms of the different tools available to you for communication, supporting people for whom English is not a first language, for example?
Yeah, it's a consistent challenge, Cassandra. Yeah, I think the work, the thoughts we've had around it over the last 12 months, particularly, is that we need to move more towards that, you know, visual aids plus auditory instead of written for a lot of communities. So that, because the issue we found as well is that we you know, madly started translating stuff into different languages so that we could send it out as flyers and things, and then, you know, quickly realizing that people couldn't even read it in their own language. So I was like, okay, that was a complete waste of time. So so it was, yeah, so then we realized that auditory, you know, but then how do we get it across to everybody type thing. So yeah, it's a work in progress, really, Cassandra. I think that there hasn't been anything that we've experienced that's nailed it 100%. So yeah, I think and each community is completely different as well. So it's, you know, what work for one won't work for another.
Yep.
But yeah, I think what Andrew mentioned about New South Wales, that Voices for Power program in Sydney, looks really exciting, like what opportunities can come out of there. So yes, I think that's definitely a space to watch.
It'd almost be impossible for an energy company to get so granular.
Yeah.
But that's where community advocates and the Sydney Voices, Power Sydney Voices, and yourselves can get into that granularity. So I think there's obviously opportunities there for partnerships with organisations like yours and others to get that granularity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really smart way of going about it, because it goes back to that trust thing that Cassandra mentioned before, that third-party trust. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's interesting, some people are having problems with their internet, which I think underlines some of the issues we're talking about. So even if we can't get it straight on this sort of forum, what does that say about other customers? All right, is there anyone else who would like to make a comment or follow up anything that's been said? If not, Andrew or Cass, do you have any other comments or questions that you want to raise?
Well, there's a couple of things to pick up on. One is the extent to which things that have been put in place for these last 12 months, protective measures, greater collaboration and cooperation, how much of that do you think is going to stick? And to what extent do you think, for example, this panel should highlight the importance of certain improvements being continued? So, you know, this is hopefully a year that doesn't get repeated anytime soon, but we'll see. But we do know we've got large numbers of people who've got a lot of energy debt sitting there. And in some cases, this is a great uncertain next 12 months in terms of what actually will happen. We're very aware of that. So it's just an opportunity for you to highlight what you think has been improvements that we would encourage signatories to stick with. And if I may just flag, for example, on this question of ensuring people are on the right plan, that is not a new issue. It's not. And is this the time for us to go, you know, we've really got to make sure it happens? What is it that we need to recommend be done to ensure that that happens, beyond continuing sort of cultural change, which is, you know, hard. Any comments on that?
I think just with a retailer focus, it's just to, especially for Vic, is to just follow all of the steps of the payment difficulty framework. It's all laid out exactly what support it should be made available to someone who starts getting into debt. Like, it's, from my end, it's simple. It's easily done for someone on the phone. And if all of those steps were undertaken, then we would see, especially for people who are really struggling, we would see a lot better early intervention and better outcomes at the other end.
Just to take up that theme, Matt, and possibly Anna, the whole question of energy efficiency is so linked with the cost of energy and the whole affordability question, where people are living in poor premises, they buy cheap products that have high running costs, all the rest of the things that you know about. So where's the answer there? Are energy companies doing enough about assisting customers to make their whole lives more energy efficient? What's the role of government here? Where does that responsibility lie? Because customers will be left behind if they are still using energy inefficient products and living in energy inefficient premises.
Well, I think a plug for Cassandra and ACOS's report that was re-released last week, with fantastic work from Deloitte on the economic impacts of a national low energy efficiency program. Australian Energy Foundation is very much behind that plan. It's an excellent plan. It's a much needed plan, because energy efficient low income homes will have a massive impact on financial hardship. Australian Energy Foundation is coming to the end of delivering another 1,000 home upgrades in low income households. So we're ready and eager to deliver. We're in discussions with a number of different state governments, philanthropists and impact investors around a model to be able to scale up these home upgrades across more households. It very much needs to be done. There could definitely be a role for energy companies who would want to participate in a pilot, because one aspects of the financial model is shifting energy bill savings to cover the costs of the upfront costs of upgrades. So there's very much a role that energy companies could play in the administration of that sort of program and in supporting that as well. And very much open to conversations on this topic.
Yeah, I think, Claire, there's a really good opportunity for collaboration between state government and energy businesses around this, and especially community organisations and organisations such as Anna's as well, because they're really experienced in the energy efficiency space. But for us, it's a no-brainer. If someone who's on a low income is in a really energy efficient property, then their bills are going to be very low and hopefully more affordable. But it's also going to be a healthier home as well, so they're going to have less issues with illnesses over the winter period and summer period. So there's a whole bunch of societal benefits that come out of it as well. So I think there's huge gains to be made in that area.
I think that's right.
Emissions reduction.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so federal government should be on board as well, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of feeds into the minimum standards, minimum rental standards as well for Victoria. And across the country, to make sure that that's mandated, so that anyone who's in a rental property has a certain level of standard that their property is going to attain, so that they can be sure that they're not walking into a place that is going to see them have really inexpensive bills that they might be paying slightly cheaper rent, but they're going to be paying for it somewhere else.
Yes, it's ironic if we are talking about electric vehicles and batteries, when on the one hand, and then we're talking about people who are living with very poor appliances on the other, and would never even come within cooee of an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
All right. Now, anyone else? Sorry, Andrew, did you want to say something?
Oh, just a question for the advocates that we have on the call. just a temperature check on how you see, or how you think people are feeling around their level of anxiety about, this goes to Cass's question, about whether we go back to the pre-COVID days of debt collection and disconnection, and whether people are concerned that, you know, have we, the improvements that we've seen recently, will they stick, or will we go back to the bad old days, the so-called bad old days? Is it, can I get a temperature check from your perspective on how, is there a level of anxiety out there?
We're definitely anxious about that, Andrew, because the level of debt that people have at the moment is enormous. Like, it's, I think, one of the programs we run, it's averaging around $4,000 per household. So you know, and that obviously floats from a few $100s to over $10,000-12,000. So, and the majority of our clients are on fixed incomes and in rental properties. So if they've got debts on that, they're probably behind on their rent, and they're behind on their water bills, and they're behind on their credit cards, and so there's just a whole suite of things that's financially a strain at the moment. So I mean, because the problem is, then if they get disconnected because of no inability to pay it, then they will struggle to find another retailer who wants to take them on. So you've got that issue potentially popping up as well. So we're definitely concerned about that.
Emily Wood, would you like to make a comment?
I did. I wanted to pick up on the energy bills cost issue just briefly. I work for the EUAA, so we represent very large energy users, but this is an issue for all consumers. And something you mentioned in your introduction, Claire, around how government is involved and where the cost should go, and the ISP, the plan for increased interconnectors, is just a giant cost that is coming, and at the moment it looks likely that consumers will bear the cost of that. We're quite concerned about that. We don't think people are really across what that's going to do to energy bills. We are concerned that it's not going to be a fair allocation of costs unless it's better shared. And, it's billions and billions of dollars for these new interconnectors, which we're going to need to transition our economy to greater renewable energy and pick up all those reses. And however, the contribution of, or who pays for these interconnectors, I think that is a conversation that needs to be had openly. We need to make sure that everybody is aware of this and look at what is a fair allocation of costs. The EUAA views that renewable energy companies and government should help cover the cost of this. It shouldn't all be lumped on consumers, because it's just going to increase bills potentially dramatically. I've got a few other things I would like to share before we go, but I don't want to take away from the conversation you're having with residential customers either.
No, look, do it now, Emily, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that on a positive note, over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, we have seen an increase in interest in the quality and quantity of engagement from Energy Charter signatories. We think the Energy Charter has made an impact on the way they're viewing customers and how they engage with customers, and it's been a really positive thing. So we've definitely increased our engagement, and there's been an increased interest in having conversations, understanding large user viewpoints, trying to come to some kind of, they're happy to look at changes to what their plans are, things like that. So that's been really fantastic. And we did want to applaud that. And that's something that we hope continues into the long term. We hope it's something that's here to stay. And then I also wanted to say that I've participated on the National Customer Code, which is a Better Together initiative. I've been fortunate to be a customer advocate on that, and that has been a terrific forum that has engaged retailers, consultants and brokers on developing what is a voluntary code of how they'll engage with their clients to improve transparency, literacy of what's on their bill, what's coming, how they're charging, which I think is a really positive tool. And it's great to see a whole lot of different companies signing on to that. I think that will deliver really fantastic benefits for small businesses and large businesses. And then the only other thing I wanted to add is around the disclosures themselves. So I've had a brief look over them, and I do think they're simpler to read this year, which is great. I prefer the ones that have tabulated kind of summaries. I find that much easier to see what they've tried to achieve, where they're at with it. Some of them have got traffic light systems on them, which is terrific. Makes it really simple when you're reading lots of documents to really quickly get a grasp of what's going on, where they're at, where their priorities are, and how it. And some of them have linked back to what the panel has recommended in their recommendations, which I think is terrific too. So I just wanted to provide that feedback too.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Now, I think we've lost, some people have had to move on to other meetings and have had to go. So let me make sure that everyone has said everything that they'd like to say. Otherwise, it's been a very useful meeting, and we really appreciate your time and your feedback. It's been really relevant to our discussion and given us food for thought in terms of our analysis of this year's disclosure. I would encourage you, and again, I know time is difficult, but if you'd like to put in a submission to the panel, even if it's in dot point form in an email, we don't mind, just to highlight some of the issues that you think are important that we need to take into account. Please do. All the information is on the IAP website. Our report will be out in December, and that will be circulated to all of you. So thank you very much for your contributions and your time. We really do appreciate it, and it's been most useful for us. So thanks, everyone.